We are the original victims of identity theft. Yeah. You can do all kinds of genealogy research, but for us as Black folks in America, ultimately we hit a brick wall because we weren't even recorded as people until I believe the 1870 census. So to transform the way we view ourselves and the way we view Africa. And we do that through DNA. We use what we already have in us to bridge that gap from wherever the paper trail stops to where your people were before North Carolina, before Alabama, before DC, before Haiti, before Jamaica, to give you a sense of place and a sense of belonging.
Powerful words from one of today's guests. You'll hear more from her and from our panel, but first, let me introduce myself. I'm Anquinette Crosby, the new host of Vocal Point, and I look forward to presenting you with interesting and informative shows. Today's program is about African genealogy, finding present-day meaning in our distant past. Many Black celebrities and everyday people have gone on a self-discovery journey. They want to trace their ancestral roots in Africa. They've used DNA testing to accomplish this and have been profoundly affected by the results. We'll hear some of their stories, and we'll learn why finding out they were from Cameroon, Nigeria, or Sierra Leone gave them a sense of identity. We'll discuss the value of this process, and we'll examine how knowing your roots could help you better determine your future. My guests today are Gina Page. She is the co-founder of African Ancestry. Her company helps people of African descent trace their genetic history. They have helped more than 150,000 people reconnect with their family tree. Dr. Georgia Dunston is the founder of the National Human Genome Center here at Howard University. The center is a leader in genetic studies for African Americans and people of color. She has done extensive research on the medical significance of ancestral genetics. Glenn Gordon Sangu is an actor and playwright and co-founder of the Continuum Project. The company combines the arts and African ancestry testing to empower communities. Gina, let's start with you. Now, at the top of the program, we heard you say, we are the original victims of identity theft. Now, that's a strong statement. Can you expand on that?
Certainly. You know, there was a movie out recently about identity theft, and they were making light of it, and it just caused me to think that, you know, we're the only group in this country that can't point to a country of origin, we meaning African Americans. So we live with and work with people who know their Italian roots or their Salvadoran roots or their Russian roots, and we claim Africa, which I always say that's great because we get a huge continent with over 50 countries, but that means that there are thousands of cultures and thousands of traditions that we know nothing about, simply because some business owners decided that it was in their business interest to disconnect us from that past. And so that's, to me, what makes us the original victims of identity theft.
So how does the process work?
Well, thanks to the work of people like Dr. Dunston, we're able to look at DNA that's inherited either through your maternal line, mother to mother to mother on back, or your paternal line, father to father to father on back, and isolate specific parts of that DNA that determine your ancestry. We then compare that DNA to the world's largest database of indigenous African DNA and look for matches. And because of the nature of how DNA is inherited and the fact that it doesn't change significantly, these parts of it over time, if I find your DNA somewhere else in the world, then I found people with whom you share a common ancestry.
How long can the process take from start to finish?
So we have test kits. It's do it yourself. We don't come to you. There's no blood. You just do it in the, comfort of your own home or your office. You swab the inside of your cheeks. You return those swabs to us. We send them to a lab, and then our scientific team analyzes the DNA results. And that entire process takes about 6 to 8 weeks.
And what would the cost for something like that be?
Well, our tests are actually very affordable. We're tracing one line of a family tree, and so those results are the same for everybody in the family on that line, and the tests are under $300.
Okay. Dr. Dunstan, I want to bring you into the conversation. So talk a little bit about your work, and what is the difference between what you do and gene mapping, or is there a difference?
Well, first of all, I am the founding director of the National Human Genome Center at Howard, and we came into being with the mission to explore the science, because we are a research center, and to teach the knowledge, because we are an academic center, on DNA sequence variation and its interaction with the environment in causing and preventing and treating diseases that are common in African Americans and other people of African ancestry. That's our mission. So you may say the Genome Project, which got a lot of play the early part of this century, big news, big money, big science, to sequence the human genome with the hope that by sequencing the genome, we could find the information about what causes disease, every kind of disease. So the function then of our center was to participate in gathering this information to make sure that African people were represented in the information gathered, because we would be certainly this information would be used in treating disease, diagnosing disease in our population.
So it goes much deeper than just having a curiosity from where you may have come from, but it's also a medical issue as well.
Absolutely. The billions of dollars that we paid in public funds to get the sequence of the human genome makes it a national resource, and the motivation was for its potential health benefits. It turns out the same information, however, is the information that we transmit from generation to generation and the focus of Ancestry. So there were two main domains, if you will, of investigation from the Genome Project: the Ancestry, or what I would call the identity piece, but the other mainstream that the medical community was focused on was understanding the biology, or understanding what are the genes that are involved in susceptibility to disease, and how can we use this information to treat disease at the gene level.
Gina, are people ever disappointed by the results?
Yes, they are.
Really? Why so?
Well, you know, we're called AfricanAncestry.com.
Yeah.
So, and we do this work for people of African descent. But inherent in us being African Americans, or Africans in the Caribbean, or Africans really anywhere else in the world outside of Africa, there was mixing that occurred. And so while people are hoping to find their African roots, we don't always find Africa for that particular test. So for example, if your mother is black and your father is white, and we trace your father's line, it's going to go back to Europe. It's not going to go back to Africa. Now that's a real basic example. You wouldn't take the test if you knew your father was white. So what happens is when we trace the maternal line, mother to mother to mother, we find African results 90% of the time. The other 6% of the time it's European, and 2% of the time the results come back Native American. But when we trace the paternal line, father to father to father, we find European results about 35% of the time. And so people who get those European results are pissed off at me personally when we actually had nothing to do with that. So yeah, people are, but the overwhelming majority of people are ecstatic. They are over the moon happy. They are proud. They are, you know, they go on to do all kinds of amazing things with the results. But I cannot tell a lie. There are people who are upset. And even sometimes, you know, I also get those people who are mad because it's not Native American.
Yeah, I was going to say
I get
that
a lot
because
of that.
don't a lot of African Americans assume that they have a lot of Native American blood in them, and it's not.
Not based on the testing that we do.
Okay.
Now, I have to say in their defense, so people, you know, they have these pictures of their great-great-grandmother with long hair down to here and, you know, fine features and all of this. If you know that your maternal line is Native American, then you may not take our test. But the majority of the people who take our test expecting to find Native American, only 2% of those people come back with that.
Okay, and why is there so much confusion around that?
Well, you know, my hypothesis is that it's much easier, it's much more palatable to believe that those features that you have that may look different than African come from Native American populations rather than European populations. You know, there's a stigma with having in our community with having European ancestry. And so, you know, if you can choose, which we all can because identity is our choice, then, you know, you may feel more comfortable choosing the Native American mythology rather than the European one. Okay.
Now, Glenn, you received some results.
Yes, I
How
did.
was that?
Life-changing, transformative. I received my results in 2009, and I remember wanting it because working in New York, you meet a lot of people from a lot of different nationalities who hold that as their pride. That's their thing. I'm Dominican, I'm Italian, I am Puerto Rican, and you better not call Puerto Rican a Dominican, and that's fighting words.
Okay.
And working with young people in schools, I met so many who would try to guess where I was from. And they would say, are you like Dominican or Caribbean, or are you just regular black? And I said, what do you mean by regular black? They said, the one with no culture. And I realized at that point, and subsequent points before that, that it was imperative that we know where we're from and have a very strong, tangible connection. So when I got my results, I wasn't jumping for joy because it was the T-car from Cameroon. I hadn't heard of, I'd heard of Cameroon, I hadn't heard of the T-car. And I was thinking, what does this mean now? And what it meant is I had a responsibility to figure out what being T-car meant and how that can actively influence my life on a day-to-day level, on a yearly level, and ultimately the legacy that I'm going to pass down to future generations. And that started my whole journey.
So how long ago was this, and what changes have you made in your life now that you know where you've originated from?
Man.
How much time?
How much time you got? Well, I'm an actor and a playwright, so I wrote a play about my results that ended up getting me to be a playwright in residence at the Public Theater. I co-founded a company in 2008 with my business partner called the Continuum Project, where we do this work using Gina's DNA tests and theater with young people to have them explore their roots. I received a naming ceremony from the Bamoon T-car people here in Silver Spring, and I was named Sangu. And I'll be going to the Ngwen Festival in the Bamoon Kingdom in November to reconnect for the first time with my relatives.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm learning the language and eating the food. I was just at a meeting Sunday in New York. They don't speak to me in English. They only speak Bamoon to me because they say, we want your DNA to remember where it came from.
Okay. So you've really embraced this new culture.
Absolutely. You have to.
What about the youth? You said it's so important for the youth to understand testing and going through it. Why so?
This story will probably illustrate it best. A friend of mine just did the swabs, and she sat her two daughters down to discuss this. And her daughter said, well, why? One of her daughters said, why does this matter? And she said, let me give you an example. Imagine a man raped me, and when you were born, took you away from me. And the same cycle repeated to your children and their children and their children. Would you want your great-grandchildren to ask, why do I matter? And stopped her dead in her tracks. I mean, you have stories like Twitter hashtags, Team Light Skin, Team Dark Skin. You have people still dealing with issues of hair, issues of beauty, issues of, do I look too black? Do I act too black? Am I an Oreo? Am I a reverse Oreo? All of these things that our young people are dealing with, that they don't have a vocabulary or an understanding, and we need to unpack that for our young people. Otherwise, the cycle continues to repeat itself, and it's happening every day.
Gina, is there a difference from an African American going through the testing versus somebody of European descent?
Well, there is no difference between an African American taking our test versus a European. Anyone can take our test because, again, we are looking for ancestry and we don't know what we're going to find. Where the difference comes in is in the result. So if the ancestry is African, then we remain the only company today that can tell you the present day country in Africa and the ethnic group. So we all already know we're from Africa. That's not the answer that we're looking for. We want to know, is it Cameroon? Is it Guinea-Bissau? Who are the people? If the ancestry is not African, the best we can do is give sort of a broad general grouping within Europe or within the Middle East or within Asia. So that's the difference, is it's the specificity of the result.
Have you heard any negative feedback about getting tested?
Well, that's a great question. Yes, I have.
Really?
We are 11 years old. We launched this company in February of 2003. And at the beginning, we got a lot of criticism and a lot of pushback. We still are the only African American owned company in the business. And so there was a lot of pushback from white scientists who were upset that we wouldn't share our data. But we're a business, and that's our core competency. And so there was some criticism there. There was some criticism as to how specific you could be with results. Right. And I think all of that was born out of a number of things. One, people not wanting us to be able to share this knowledge because it is powerful. And then two, people not, from a business perspective, I think, not wanting us to compete. 11 years later, all of the other companies in the industry now seem to see some value in African Americans knowing where they're from. So, yes, we have seen some criticism. Growing pains. And then two, we never are taught anything positive about Africa, if we're taught anything at all. And so even within our own community, it's still a struggle to get people to understand why this is important and how it can actually impact their life, because we've grown up 40 years, 60 years, 80 years, 20 years with so much misinformation that we don't even want to be African. So.
Okay. We're going to take a short pause in the conversation to show you a video of a few people receiving the results of their tests. This reveal event was a joint effort between Howard University's Friends of the Andrew Rankin Chapel and African Ancestry. Let's take a look.
And the people that you share ancestry with in this country, they invented, if you will, an instrument, a string instrument called the accounting. And the accounting gave rise ultimately to the banjo, which gave rise to the blues, which gave rise to R&B, which gave rise to hip hop, So you can see that there's a history in your ancestry of creating music. You share ancestry with the Jola people living in Guinea-Bissau today. Congratulations. And the reason I know that is because we did some research when we were revealing Q-Tip's ancestry from a tribe called Quest, and he's Jola, along with Roland Martin. He's from Guinea-Bissau, as well as India Arie.
Don Cheadle belongs to this country. Spike Lee belongs to this country. Quincy Jones belongs to this country. Condoleezza Rice belongs to this country. Taraji P. Henson belongs to this country. And I belong to this country. You all share ancestry, and you got some cousins here with people living in Cameroon today.
You all are an example of how African Americans are a melting pot. Inherent in us being African American means that there was some mixing going on, right? Whether it be forced or consensual mixing. And so the three of you are part of those 35% or 2% of people that we didn't find African ancestry for, but for whom we did get a hit.
That looked like a great experience. Now, in that last clip, Dr. Dunstan, Gina talked about how we are a melting pot. And it makes me think of your interest in using knowledge compiled in DNA testing to build collaborations that focus on the health of people from the African diaspora. So talk about that a little bit.
I want to first thank WHUT for this program. Because as I said earlier, my entree into this area came from the medical, the biology side. But what we have been discussing here today, the identity side of what we've learned from sequencing the genome, is truly the big story, especially today. In health, we know that identity, how you define yourself, how you see yourself, what you believe is the truth about yourself governs behavior. And behavior is the major risk factor in these groups of diseases we call health disparities. Behavior. Behavior is rounded in how you see yourself in your environment. And one of the biggest areas in science now is neuroscience. And a major focus in that area is to understand behavior. And with mental health, so much in the news, in the public news, why people behave the way they do, why they make the choices that they make. And the idea that we now have science, tools, and technologies to begin to understand how the brain functions, how thoughts are translated into behaviors. And we will understand this at a level of the DNA. And the potential then to manipulate. So I just wanted to underscore that this question of identity, who am I, how that relates to behavior, and how that impacts health, not only of the individual, but of the nation and of the world, is front and center.
Having this knowledge, does it help cure diseases?
Excellent, excellent question. The interesting thing is we sequence the genome looking for the disease gene, but most of the studies that we have done, billions of dollars, have not identified that bad gene. Even though we do studies and we'll call it the hypertension gene, the asthma gene, the diabetes gene. But what the genome studies is showing, the genome is a story in and of itself. A story about life, a story about human origins with its roots in Africa, a story about human migrations and different environments that we are in, a story about adaptation, how people have adjusted to their environments over time. And I like to think the future story, which is most of the genome, and put that plug in. Most of the genome is about the future. Whereas right now, we get a running start by going back, so that as we run forward now, we can reach our goal. So yes, that's the exciting thing about this show for me, is that ancestry, a sense of identity, how that influences how we think, and how we think influences what we do, and how that is directly related to our health, and is mainstream now.
Now you're going to be heading to Ghana for, I believe, 12 months, and talk about your work.
I will be going to Ghana along with my colleague in the College of Pharmacy, Dr. Etienne, because the Genome Center is now really looking into this area of what we call pharmacogenomics. Because just like we've studied how our genes influence diseases that we are susceptible to, our genes and differences also influence how we metabolize drugs. And we live in a major pharmaceutical industry nation. And for most of the chronic disease, you're taking a pill for the rest of your life, okay? And there's genetic variation in how we metabolize, in other words, how we break down those drugs. And the rate at which you break down drugs can influence susceptibility to disease. It's been said that if you consider adverse drug effects, that those numbers would be higher than many of our common diseases, possibly third or fourth. So it's an area, again, where understanding the genetics in terms of moving to, I'd like to underscore this, because where we're moving now from population studies is what we call personalized medicine, where now that knowledge on your DNA can actually be used to determine what drug is best for you, in what dose. Even the pharmaceuticals companies say the right drug for the right person at the right time in the right amount.
Where do you see the future of ancestral research going?
Okay, I love to say that the Genome Project is a story, a story of human origins. And I'll say this again, human migrations, human adaptations. And this is my end, and I believe a story about human liberation. I think we are en route to something you said, Glenn. This need to know who you are is an integral part of the human story wherever you're from. People want to know who they are. They want to know where I come from. And where most of us don't have the luxury that some of us have time to think about those things. You're so busy trying to do the day-to-day thing. But I think built into the human is a desire to know who you are, why you are. And the reason is because nothing is more empowering than a sense of identity.
That's right.
To know who you are and why you are. And tying those two together, a sense of who, just this kind of, I was really fascinated what you were sharing about what had been the outcome, because that's a prelude to what I do believe, that in understanding who we are, and that we are each unique, and that we come equipped already with gifts and talents and something to give. And this journey towards self-discovery is part of that, because liberation cannot come without a sense of who you are.
Yes.
Can I add something to that too? Not that I can add to Dr. Johnson, but one of the things that we didn't set out to do that we actually have done through AfricanAncestry.com is to increase the genetic literacy of our community. And I think that's important in terms of liberation, because before us, there was nothing positive that happened with your DNA. All the stories were negative until recently people are getting exonerated and that kind of thing. But now people understand a little bit more that DNA can be used for our benefit, and they understand a little bit better their own DNA. And so I think that that is a part of that liberation as well.
And so this would not even occur had it not been for DNA. And we know DNA hasn't been around forever. So is it because of DNA testing.
Well, it's not. We've had our DNA
Yeah.
forever,
Right,
which is
but
why
the
we get to.
testing-
But actually, the sequencing of the genome and all of the work that has gone into us scientists being able to read
Right.
our genome is what has given rise to this. And I would like to say that I am very happy and proud to be a Black woman right now because a Black woman is leading the effort in Dr. Dunstan in moving us from knowing who we are to understanding our health history. And that's going to be critical for our community.
Okay. And the testing has become a lot easier too, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
You just rub the inside of your cheek.
A home kit.
Yeah, and
A
you're
home
done.
kit. Right.
Keep
Okay.
in mind, in the beginning, the DNA, you know, it was here.
Yeah.
It's, as you said, the discovery of it, and where science has given us a whole new view. And I like to say from the inside out. And that needs to be appreciated at this time. Our view of ourselves, our view of our world has been based on what we can see, touch, feel, what we've been told. And it's largely external.
Okay. Well, as was mentioned earlier, getting these results can be life-changing. Gina, I'd like to read a few testimonials from your website. Let's start with actor Blair Underwood, and he says, "It has given me a sense of community and satisfied a lifelong curiosity. The knowledge has given me a better understanding of the person I've become." And from Spike Lee, "The images of Africa that we received are often limited and negative. So it is not surprising that African Americans don't have a positive connection to the continent. Now, thanks to DNA testing, African Americans can finally find out what region of Africa their ancestors were from. It was a revelation for me and my family to discover part of our ancestry." That's huge. Well, we interviewed a few people from our area, some of whom are in our audience today, who were also inspired by their results. Let's hear from them now.
Something happened when I found out that I was from a specific people in Cameroon. I learned that they are the artisans, that they are the entrepreneurs, that they are the business people of Cameroon. And it explained to me why my grandmother was such an entrepreneur with a third-grade education. When she died a few years ago, she had 29 homes that she left her children. And I only regret that she did not know that her entrepreneurial drive was in her DNA from the Bamileke people of Cameroon.
Your mother's line, there was a Native American woman. Does that resonate with you? I see you.
I found out that my ancestry is Native American, so I was amongst the 2% of people who had the Native American ancestry. For me, it was kind of a confirmation because I know they say a lot of African Americans will claim that they are Native American, but they really aren't. I definitely want to start learning more about the culture and history. My family has been doing the research to find out what tribe and to try to get validated for the different tribes in the Connecticut area.
Back on the plantation and in other places, things happened that we didn't know about. And it could have been consensual or non-consensual. We don't know that. As an African American, these things are hidden from you. But I'm proud to be European also.
On the patriarchal side, my folk came out of basically Portugal, the patriarchal of my father's side. And on my mother's side, we came out of the middle region of West Africa, next to Sierra Leone and Liberia, the Mende people who crossed about 3 different borders over there because they were rice growers. And so it showed that we had an incredible culture. So that was encouraging. Matter of fact, the people on the Amistad were from the Mende tribe.
I think it's really crucially important that we know who we are and where we're from. But in particular, our young people, they don't have a sense of history. And as history gets rewritten for us as African American people or people in the diaspora, it's important that our young people are connected not only to the African continent, but to the people from which they originate.
At Howard, a lot of emphasis is placed on learning the history that we weren't taught necessarily in our secondary and primary schooling as far as Black history. And so I think it is important that we also push getting to knowing like your actual African ancestry and not just going as far back to the slave plantation that your family's from, but actually going back further.
That knowledge breeds responsibility. Now you know that you can transcend what we were taught over here.
So I would love to go to Cameroon one day. I'm very excited that that's a possibility now, that I can be able to go there and be able to connect with the people and hopefully be able to find the specific ethnic group.
My family now are taking on the task of planning and organizing a trip to go visit Equatorial Guinea and to find out what it looks like. I think it's important for us to go back and at least impart some type of knowledge that we can, if we can do that, or even take some knowledge from them about where we're going to go.
My grandfather was born 1881. His mother, we call her Grandma Jane, she was a slave. She was freed as a young girl after slavery. And so my thing is, we don't have to feel shame or people have no roots. We have roots.
Now I can speak to people and give purpose and definition to where I'm from. Instead of saying I'm Sammy Williams from Harlem in the South Bronx, I can now say I'm Samuel Williams, a Booby from Bioki Island in Equatorial Guinea.
I'd love to get your reaction. What do you think of that?
Glenn?
Well, I think that's what this is about. I think intrinsically we have always felt a proverbial hole in who we are. And I always equate it to young men in New York dealing with stop and frisk and internalizing that they are already suspects before they're 13 years old. Imagine you then give that young man a sense that he's Yoruba and that his ancestry comes from a place that has great spirituality, great understanding of leadership. That means that we can, I think there's an aspect of liberation where you feel upright. And I think regaining what was taken from us gives you a sense of feeling upright. And the more we can do that, the more we can actually have a tangible Kujichagulia and define ourselves for ourselves.
Do you think young people today feel as if their ancestry begins with slavery? And so trying to change that mindset that no, it goes further back than that.
Oh yes, I mean that's something that they've internalized without even knowing it sometimes. Part of that is because of education. Part of that is because of miseducation, as Carter G. Woodson so brilliantly articulated. And it's like he said, when you can control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions. I see it time and time again with young people I work with. Once they start to get a sense of who they are, all of a sudden you can see a transformation occur. And they feel more empowered. I had one young student in my program who said to his high school teacher, "I'm Mende from Sierra Leone. There's nothing in this curriculum about Africa. Can we have something in our curriculum that discusses Africa?" And his teacher, by necessity of him, had to put in a whole curriculum about Africa. This is someone who's taking control of his destiny. We want all of our young people to do that, to feel empowered. And with knowledge comes the potential for empowerment.
And how are you turning this into art with the Continuum Project?
We start off with exploring 4 concepts in our legacy program: identity, ancestry, racism, and legacy. We pull it right from their experience. So what we do is we use West African performance aesthetics, call and response, multiple meter, the dominance of a percussive concept, and we have them build theater. And from that, they explore their own journeys. We ask them a question like, when was the first time you realized you were black? And what did that mean to you? We have them profile and research one of their own ancestors and write a monologue in their voice about what would that ancestor want to pass on to you. And after they've created this play using these performance aesthetics and they've performed this play for their family and friends, then we give them the results of their DNA test. So we try to spark the curiosity first and then give them a charge. Now that you know, you have to take this forward and you have to realize the tangible value of these results, and they get really inspired.
Gina, what you
I
want to say
just
something?
wanted to add, what's so remarkable about what Glenn and Nicole and the Continuum Project is doing is that it's giving kids, like middle schoolers, even though they've gone up to college, but the bulk of the kids are middle schoolers, it's giving them a foundation today. I was really excited to see the video because here are grown adults who've had a whole set of life experiences who are now able to communicate what this means to them. And so often it's hard for me you almost don't even know the impact or know that you don't know until you find out. And I can't communicate that to you. You know, you look at me as a business person, yeah, of course, you just want me to take your test. But I think their testimonies show the power that this knowledge has that you may not even realize until you receive the answer.
My question, okay, while African Americans may be excited about finding these results out, what about the relatives, like you said, that you're going to be meeting? Are they equally as excited and embracing?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh man, one of the first things that someone said to me was, it's not your fault you were taken. And I don't know why that hit me so hard, but they hugged me like they had lost a child. And I think, there's a huge misconception that, Africans don't want us, they don't think we're African, they don't want no parts of us. That hasn't been my experience. That may be true I don't think that's true across the board, let me say that. But they have embraced me, and I think they're understanding our story with our legacy of enslavement, as we're understanding their story with their legacy of colonialism. And we're finding common threads. And I think the biggest thing of going back to the continent isn't just to reconnect, but to actually build bridges for the future as well.
And that's important because just as we don't learn anything positive about them, they don't learn much positive about us. The African image of the African American is extremely Western, it's extremely media driven, and they also don't, just like we don't learn about our enslavement and our history, they don't learn about our enslavement and our history. So this really is a two-way street that is building bridges between us and our cousins across the Atlantic.
Do you think this is going to redefine Black family reunions? I know my family, we have family reunions every year, but won't it be interesting that we can bring over
no more pigs feet, y'all. Get that couscous ready.
And we see that. We see people every summer. We get people who take the test around now so that they can share the results with their family. Imagine I did a presentation to a group at a family reunion that was local, and they had the patriarch take the test. So let's just say it was the Johnson family reunion. So when I did the reveal, I asked, out of 125 people, everyone whose father is a Johnson, please stand. 75 people stood. And I was able to tell 75 people that they share ancestry with the Akan people living in Ghana today. That changed. I mean, and what you heard when I said that was, this collective amazement of this information. So it's definitely changing the family reunion dynamic for sure.
Yeah, that's exciting.
If I can add something that's come out of this from the family reunion aspect, I think Glenn told me that he is planning to go. Families that have taken the test and have traced their roots back to places in Africa, I understand that now there is an effort where communities in Africa are actually setting up ceremonies that welcome and celebrate and recognize the reunion. So if I can do a plug, one of the projects that's on the front burner for the Genome Center is what we call the Human Genome Family Reunion Project.
Okay.
Now, if I could just add here, this excitement that we see from looking at the genome through identity, we don't get that trying to recruit for health concerns, because you're trying to recruit people to be in studies to find out what's wrong with me.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so your question about the family and the whole issue of family, when you're coming from that perspective, is a real keg of worms in terms of people knowing.
Right.
So, well,
And I think that's also part of the transformation, is how then do we ask the hard questions of ourselves once we find out our results, so that we can be healthier and make stronger choices for that.
Okay.
and that's why bringing the two together is part of our job.
Absolutely.
To really take the power of this knowledge and truly use it to solve the problems.
That's right.
That begin with a wrong sense of who you are. How your environment is tied to the problems we have not put as much emphasis on as we have how your gene
Right.
is involved.
We're going to right the wrongs, you know, we're righting the wrongs. All right, well, we know after listening to our panel today and watching our videos, our studio audience is eager to jump into the conversation. Please give us your name and briefly state your question or comment.
Hello, my name is Hollis Gentry. I am a professional African American genealogist, the only one in the country who works for a lineage society. And I work for the Daughters of the American Revolution, and we have just moved to a point where we're accepting DNA evidence as part of documenting lineages. I also am active on Afrogenius.com, which is an African American genealogy online source for everything relating to African American genealogy. There's a forum relating to DNA. And every time someone takes the test and they get their results, they're quite excited, and they want to know how to bridge the gap between Africa and America. They've done a little bit of, they've done some research, a little bit of research. There's nothing that they can really do in terms of records for Africa. One thing that everyone keeps asking for, they're clamoring for, they're desperate to get, is the way to bridge that gap with the historical record and the DNA. And we need a little bit more, we need a lot more in understanding how to use those results with our own research. And I'm trying to contain this, but I have not tested with you. I've tested with 2 other companies, and I don't know if is it okay if I mention who they are?
Absolutely.
Okay, Family Tree and Ancestry. And I have also worked with other individuals who have traced their ancestry, who have found out who their African ethnic ancestry is. And my concern is, how do we know what the right process is? This is essentially you plugging for African Americans to come with you first, as opposed to some of the other ones. The big question everybody always asks is, who do we test with first and why, especially when you're talking about dollars and cents? What's the sequence you want to suggest? And
Well,
I said a whole lot. but-
Nice to meet you now.
Great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. First of all, I want to say when it comes to dollars and cents, you get what you pay for. Okay, so whatever value you place on any purchase is the value that you're going to get out of it. If you're interested in finding out where in Africa your ancestry is shared today, then I would recommend AfricanAncestry.com first, because we have the largest database of indigenous African lineages. So when you're looking for a comparison, you want to compare against as many possibilities as you can. And unfortunately for the people who haven't used our company, if they go with other companies, that set of comparison is much smaller. And so the variation and in the results is very wide. So I would say that you would start with us. Now, if you're looking to determine relationships with others in terms of the genealogy research, people are comparing their DNA and their family history information. Some of the other companies make that available. We haven't gotten there yet because we are kind of working with our target market, and in large part we're still trying to get Black folks to accept DNA as an option. So to tell them, well, put your DNA in this database and make it available is a bigger leap than we're ready to take right now. But if you want to know that African answer, we're the best place to start. Now, in terms of the bridge, it's very hard. We see ourselves as a bridge between where your family tree stops and where your family was before the slave trade. I don't know how you can connect the two because there are no records. But one of the things we see is people, when they start looking at behaviors and the things that Glenn and Dr. Dunstan have spoken of, you often can see some of those similarities within your family in terms of traditions, in terms of naming, those kinds of things. So it might be just a more emphasis on looking at family traditions and practices. That might help bridge the gap.
If I can weigh in on that, I'm hoping that something we said earlier might be a way to bridge the gap. And that is some of these families that have done their tracing back to sites in Africa and then setting up communication where these communities are welcoming these families back and actually having ceremonies. That meets a need in terms of the identity question, but it's a powerful beginning for solving the problems, because the same variations in our genome that we use to locate our ancestry are the same variations that we use to find how you respond to a drug or your susceptibility to disease. So what I would hope is out of this bringing together, we can have roots in Africa, which gives us information on these variants relative to why we have certain frequencies of alleles high. We think, our hypothesis we're working at is related to pathogens in the environment that the population had to be successful in order for you to be here. Because if your ancestor was not capable, you wouldn't be here. So we can use our family roots in Africa to look at those genes that are involved in host response or your protection against physical threats, if you will. And we can compare those same genes in the African American population, where we see these same genes, but maybe the protection that you're after now is a psychological protection against some of what you've been taught and we've been by. Because we're seeing the body responds to anything that threatens its survival. And so these genes that we're finding for ancestry can be very instructive in terms of our understanding how the body defends itself against. Because if those genes weren't operative, if they weren't higher, we wouldn't find them higher in our population. So it's survival. We study disparities, but we are a resilient people.
That's right.
And if we can get together looking at what is it about our genes that allows us to be here today, then we can use that knowledge instructively too.
You said, are there people that don't want us to find out about our roots? Who would that be?
Who would stand to lose
Right.
if you found out how you can prevent a disease that you are?
Pharmaceutical companies and...
Well, I'm just saying, who would benefit from us learning about ourselves in ways that's going to help us to truly eliminate health disparities, prevent disease, promote health?
Or even to feel good about who we are and to walk with our heads high and to not drop out of school and to break glass ceilings and all of those things can happen when you have that strong sense of identity.
Right. Okay, we have another question.
Hi, I'm Valerie Mahomes, and I am so enamored of this program. I love it and talk about it everywhere I go. I'm also a behavioral scientist. I work at the National Institutes of Health, and I study the intergenerational effects of poverty and violence and trauma. And I had the occasion to go to a UN meeting on the transatlantic slave trade, and we had groups of kids that we Skyped in from various countries in Africa, as well as children here in the United States, just talking about their experiences and their understandings. And you're so right, the gap, there's a wide chasm in the knowledge base. But the young children in Africa said something that I will never forget. They said that we talk so much about the Africans in America being taken from Africa and being brought to this foreign country, but we never talk about the disruption to their communities and to their families in Africa. They had their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers taken from them, and there's a hole in that community, and there's a hole in their hearts and their experiences of trauma, which they have transmitted from generation to generation. And this was about a 14-year-old student who was talking about this is why children are not valued as in the way that we should value children. This is why we have trafficking and violence against children and other kinds of things, because those bonds were broken. So I see this process of having us know about each other as a way of healing in the divide, both doing some of the epigenetic work and looking at how we understand the risk and protective factors in these experiences that we have to make us stronger as a people, and understanding what those protective factors are and developing interventions that can help recreate them and strengthen them.
Thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave things right there as we've run out of time. Again, I want to thank our panel for being with us today: Gina Page, Dr. Georgia Dunstan, and Glenn Gordon Sangu, and our studio audience for their participation. And of course, you at home for watching. For Vocal Point, I'm Anquinette Crosby. Until next time, I'll save you a seat.